What do young farmers have to do with new species in the Mediterranean? And with dying oases in Morocco? If you want to know, then you're in exactly the right place. We're going to take you on a journey to the coasts of the Mediterranean. At locations where perhaps you too would like to holiday, temperatures are rising 20% higher than on the average worldwide. Don't worry, we're not going to show you some disaster film, but you will see how people in Spain, Israel and Morocco are experiencing climate change and what steps they are taking to prevent the worst aspects of global warming. Before we set off, here's some information published in July 2022 by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. The Mediterranean is home to more than 500 million people. 180 million of them are already suffering from the scarcity of water. If temperatures rise by just 2 degrees Celsius, forest fires will increase by 87%, and heat waves and drought will become more and more common. That's why our journey begins in Spain, where in some areas it hasn't rained for months. Some reservoirs have almost dried up, and there are rivers that now carry hardly any water. And if these days you're having to pay a bit more for your salad in the supermarket, that's also because Europe's vegetable garden has less and less water available. That's the region around Murcia.
My name is Javier Murcia and I'm an underwater photographer.
Javi Murcia packs up his diving equipment as he does every morning and sets off with his underwater camera in the direction of the Mar Menor.
I dive almost every day, except when it storms. Then it's impossible. If there is a strong storm, or if I had night shift, then I don't dive, but usually almost every day. On average, there are 250 to 300 dives per year.
Only a thin spit of land separates the Mar Menor from the Mediterranean Sea. This largest saltwater lagoon in Europe is a unique ecosystem, and since 2022, it is the first natural area in Europe that has been given legal personality. In other words, it can go to court for its rights. But in order to do so, it was necessary to first create awareness that the Mar Menor is a unique lagoon. Javi has also campaigned for this, with his camera.
I love photography, using it to explore the behavior of animals, to observe a particular species, to learn all about its life cycle, from mating to feeding to death. When I saw how the ecosystem of the Mar Menor was deteriorating, I had to document it.
In the spring of 2016, he noticed that something was changing. It rained a lot, and so the water washed more nitrates and phosphates from the surrounding agriculture into the sea.
My God, the water that was crystal clear turned orange, then brown, then green. You couldn't even see your own hand anymore. It was horrible. At some point, even at the bottom, the oxygen level dropped. The light was no longer getting through. And without light and oxygen, the animals began to die. I watched this transformation of the Mar Menor.
In the summer of 2016, the catastrophe, tons of dead fish, protests followed, then a referendum. Over 500,000 people voted for the Mar Menor to have legal personality today. Now, any citizen can sue if he sees the rights of the lagoon violated. Anyone who harms nature can be taken to court and fined.
Many species that were typical have disappeared. The seahorse, for example. This was a unique area for seahorses in the world. You could find hundreds. I haven't seen any for years.
One reason, the water temperature is rising more and more. And so he suddenly discovered new species in front of his lens. Sea hares, for example, or spider crabs.
Increasingly, species normally found off the Canary Islands or the coasts of Guinea are being found in subtropical or tropical waters. This is new and has to do with the increase of the temperature of the sea. Many species that didn't come to the Mediterranean or found it more difficult because the water temperature was a barrier are now crossing that boundary.
In contrast, the Posidonia meadows of the Mediterranean must be saved, because like forests, they also store climate-damaging carbon, the diver tells. But that is not the only reason why it is so important to protect this unique fauna.
The Posidonia meadows are the most important ecosystem of the Mediterranean. It is the lungs of the Mediterranean. Not only do they release oxygen and sequester CO2, they also act as a barrier against the waves, protecting the beaches from erosion. The Posidonia meadows harbor a lot of life. It is a unique plant in the world, found only here. I show the world my pictures to make visible the problems our ecosystem suffers from. It is my duty. The camera is my weapon. So that's all I can do. On the radio, in magazines, on television. Still, I'm optimistic and hope that in a few years, the ecosystem of the Mar Menor and the Mediterranean Sea will recover.
In 2022, a reforestation project of the Posidonia meadows started along the coast of Murcia. Over 200 plants have already been planted. Just behind the Mar Menor, fruit and vegetables are grown on about 70,000 hectares. A large part goes to Germany, Switzerland and Great Britain. Over 40,000 jobs depend on this intensive agriculture. Since the mid-80s, water has been piped from the north to this drier region in the south.
My name is Santiago Perez Playa. I'm a farmer from Cartagena. I'm in the fourth generation.
Santiago looks anxiously at his water reservoir. It is still well filled, but per cubic metre he now pays more than twice as much as last year.
The water comes partly from the water community of Cartagena, then from the public company of the Segura Canal. A small portion comes from the Segura River, then some from the desalination plant of Torrevieja, and from the wastewater treatment plant of the municipality, because part of the water is recycled.
For Santiago Perez, climate change is not an abstract concept. It is a hard reality. Because of the lack of water, he can only farm half of his 60 hectares of land.
Production is about 10,000 kilos less per hectare than normal. This is because this year there has been almost no rain at all. Normally, there should be more potatoes of this size. There are a lot of potatoes, but only medium size. There are only potatoes of this size. The weather is becoming more unpredictable, and it usually tends to rain less. But it's also true that when it rains a lot at once. And what's missing is the infrastructure to capture and store that rainwater. It's all suddenly coming together. Climate change and the lack of investment from the government to store and distribute the water.
Even if it repeatedly does not rain for months, it does not necessarily mean that the amount of precipitation is also lower. What this means, Santiago has had to find out more and more often in recent years. In a few hours, it rains as much as it used to in a year. Small canals turn into raging rivers, flooding fields and washing fertilized soil into the Mar Menor.
In December 2016, it suddenly rained so hard. Around 240 litres between Saturday and Sunday, especially on Sunday, from noon at 12 to 7 p.m. in the evening. At midnight that Sunday, the muddy water finally flooded the village. Because these pipes that you see here were not emptied, and so all the water flooded into the village. And here, where we are now, everything was flooded and destroyed.
Today, Santiago is convinced that intensive agriculture is a thing of the past for his region, but he is still one of the few farmers who have accepted that business as usual is not an option.
Cuidado con los golpes. La hierba. Porque está rota.
Agriculture must be both environmentally sustainable and economically profitable. If a business is not profitable, it goes bankrupt. If we don't respect the environment, it affects the groundwater, and that's already heavily polluted. So the soils become saline, the earth becomes desolate, and that doesn't help either. I am the fourth generation. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father and I. We fought hard to get our little piece of land. We are dedicated to farming and producing safe food for people. Our family loves this land and what we produce. But I don't want this for the next generation. The future looks very difficult if something doesn't happen soon.
El futuro lo veo muy complicado si no se toman medidas.
But there is hope. The largest seawater desalination plant in Europe is to be built near Cartagena. It would make up for the water deficit of the entire Murcia region. An hour's drive to the north. La Junquera is the name of the 1,100-hectare farm, a laboratory for regenerative agriculture to adapt to the new climatic conditions.
My name is Yannick Schoonhoven, and I'm a farmer at La Junquera and the founder of the Regeneration Academy. Now we're going to visit the swale plot. It's one of the plots where we've dug swales to prevent erosion and to increase water uptake by the soil. It's one of the plots which are cereals at the moment, and where we plan to plant more aromatics. But this year, because of the drought, we cannot plant anything, because they would die straight away, which is a pity because we have 500,000 plants ready in the nursery. So what we are trying to do with regenerative agriculture is we are working to improve our soils, adding a lot of compost, having ground covers between our tree crops, having hedges to keep the soil within the fields. Water management practices, well, these swales that you see here are a good example. We also have dug over 60 ponds on the farm to, again, store the water, give it time to infiltrate. So where maybe before only 200 liters of water could be taken up by the soil, if you have a good organic matter amount, it might be 400 liters. So you drastically improve the water uptake just by improving the soil, and then everything is actually connected in that way. When it comes to climate change, we have to become more resilient as farmers, which means one crop for your whole farm is not working anymore. Because what if, that crop doesn't work for 3 years because of a drought or a rain or whatever? And then at some point, you cannot manage your farm anymore because you're bankrupt. You need to diversify to make sure that every year, at least one of those works. Wat een knappertje, hè? Kijk hem dan. I don't know if they're going to make it.
Janiek is an environmental scientist, and for her doctoral thesis, she interviewed Alfonso, a farmer. With the interview came love, and so the couple decided to try new ways of managing their estate as well. Alfonso's family has owned the estate for 2 centuries. He took over the farm 11 years ago. A lot has changed since then, including the climate.
Spring used to be the rainiest time of the year, but not anymore. Now there is only summer or winter, and that changes a lot. Like what you grow changes completely. I believe that regenerative agriculture has a good future. It can feed people all over the Mediterranean. Producing with regenerative agriculture doesn't mean having lower yields than with conventional or organic agriculture. On the contrary, often we even yield more.
They show how this works in their academy. Classes with future regenerative farmers.
Different types of aromatics. So we have here, this is the oregano. I don't know if you've already smelled it, but it's very, very, very strong. Watch out that you don't touch your eyes after this. Then we have the lavandine. Do we have anything else here, Jaco, on this field? I think lavender a bit.
In this field we have the oregano and espliego.
Yeah,
this is the Spanish lavender. And that's it.
And then later again we have sage. So what we're going to do now, we're going to use these 2 rows. We're going to walk that way, and we're going to take out any leaves and any branches, you can do this by hand, no problem, that are here. Until, let's say, 6 branches left, yeah? We have set up a regeneration academy, which we have done because we believe there's a lot of people that want to come and learn from a real life farm. And we also believe that education and research can strengthen our transition, because we're only 2 people, and now we're more, but we were only 2 people. So that means only 2 brains, And now, because of all the students that are coming and all the experiments that the students can do, we have like 10 brains that can think of how can we do this, What is the scale-up possibility? Shall we go to the hub?
In the beginning, there were only 2 of them in La Junquera. Now there are 20 people living and working here. The former laughingstock of the village has become an inspiration for many.
I think if we put the new pump, the electric one, that there we can control the pressure.
When my husband started with this, they thought he was crazy. They thought he was a crazy hippie that would never work. Now this is changing, and I think it makes sense. People need to see that it works. That way, we'll hopefully have a future in this region. If not, then if climate change does happen and people are not going to change with it and reform their farms, then this will be the desert in 10 years.
Janiek and Alfonso are not the only ones who believe that regenerative agriculture has an economic future. The food company Nestlé has announced that by 2030, half of its main raw materials in Spain will come from regenerative agriculture. From southern Spain on to the east coast of the Mediterranean. Admittedly, Israel is anything but a poster boy when it comes to climate. Around 95% of its energy comes from fossil fuels, and although the sun shines 300 days a year, solar power accounts for less than 5%. However, the country is ahead of everyone in two respects. In water conservation, 75% of wastewater is recycled. And in farming with little water, more than half of the country is covered by desert. To green this barren area was already the vision of Israel's founder Ben-Gurion. He motivated the settlers in the 40s to stay in the desert and green it, make it fertile, come up with something to make this barren land green. In Kibbutz Hatzarim, that's exactly what happened. This is where the technological revolution began in 1965 with the invention of drip irrigation.
My name is Nati Barak, and I am Chief Sustainability Officer Emeritus of Netafim.
Nati Barak was there when the drip irrigation revolution began. He left the city to fulfill his dream in the Negev desert.
I joined the kibbutz in 1964. Just after I graduated from high school, I went to the military. And then I came here with a group of my friends. It's called in Hebrew Gar'in. Gar'in means a seed. We were highly motivated by ideology at that time. And so we wanted to share things, to work together, to build a nice society, but also to make the desert bloom.
And so he worked as a farmer on the kibbutz, where the new irrigation system brought more yields with less and less water. In 1975, he finally began working for the kibbutz's internal company, Netafim, which would change the agriculture of Israel and soon the entire world.
We are using only wastewater to irrigate our crops. Israel is reusing 95% of our sewage. And drip irrigation, in a way, is our small, modest, perhaps not so small and not so modest contribution to helping farmers grow more with less, to making the world more sustainable.
This has grown into a global company. Drip irrigation no longer means just a hose that drips. Today, Netafim digitally analyzes the growing area before installation. Special pumps and filter systems are just as much part of the range as the classic drip system. The hoses are installed above or below ground, as required. The water thus flows directly into the root zone. According to the company, this reduces water consumption by up to 70%, while yields more than double. At the heart of this technology is the dripper.
This is the dripper. It's not just a hole in the pipe. It has a brain. It can sing, it can dance, it does miracle to the crops, as you can see in the fields. And it's quite sophisticated. If I take, this is a large model. There's so much thought was invested even in the angle of each tooth and the sharpness and the relative position of each one to assure that the water flow actually creates kind of turbulences, vortexes here, which is part of the system. And this goes into the pipe. This is the pipe. The dripper is inside the hole. And this is purple because this is used for wastewater, for treated sewage.
The company was an early adopter of digitalization in agriculture. Orit Katsir has been with Netafim. She leads the digital product development team.
We started with the philosophy of grow more with less. Today we are talking about precision irrigation and precision agriculture, which means how can we use all the technology that we have today that already developed on the world, how we can use it in order to make our irrigation the way that we grow our crops in a smartest way. Which means use less water, which means use less fertilizers and less labor that is needed in order to grow the crops.
In the test lab, she checks how the hoses react to different types of water. As a software engineer, she helped develop an operating system for precision irrigation. In real time and with AI, sensors provide farmers with information on weather, soil and crop conditions. Irrigation is controlled by cell phone.
So this is type of soil moisture sensor. We stack it into the ground so we can feel the soil very close to the root zone. This sensor measures the soil moisture inside this area and transmits the data with the radio to the central unit. So the central unit will be able to say, okay, now the soil is dry or the soil is too wet, and to decide if to operate the irrigation system or to shut it down.
Thanks to such technology, Israel has become an exporting nation for fruits and vegetables. In 2021, Israel exported nearly $3 billion worth of agricultural products. Netafim today operates in 110 countries. Since 2017, the company is 80% owned by the Mexican group Orbaya. At Kibbutz Hatzarim, however, the heart of production has remained. The water hoses produced here each year are said to reach 120 times around the world.
In the Mediterranean, the water resources are going down, so you need to adopt efficient systems to grow more crops for the growing population. Drip irrigation is the answer. חשמלי ומגשי ביצים, וכל אחד עושה לעצמו חביתות.
הגענו לגבעות בר ממש מההתחלה.
A few kilometers from the kibbutz lies Beersheba. More and more startups from the climate tech sector are finding it the ideal place for their research, thanks to various funding programs. Did you know that Israel is considered the startup nation? Over 600 startups are working on environmental and climate issues. Between 2018 and 2020, a good $3 billion were invested in climate tech companies. Most of the money came from investors around the world, only 10% from the government.
My name is Eyal Ariel, and I'm the CEO of Blue Green Water Technologies.
Eyal Harel's startup, Blue Green Water Technologies, also started out simply to solve a problem that farmers in Israel have. Recycled water for their trough irrigation is stored in such reservoirs, but toxic algae forms there.
And drip irrigation is very, very sensitive to anything in the water, anything that is but water. So one of the things that is very problematic is when you see all this green in the water, that means there is a lot of biomass in the water, a lot of bacteria, a lot of biomass. And if that goes into the drip irrigation, it's going to clog it and destroy it. And this can cause huge financial damages if not handled very well.
He soon realized that climate change was also causing more and more lakes to be infested with toxic algae blooms. Eyal and his data expert Gabe thus searched for a means to cleanse the waters of these bacteria.
Let's just take the boat upwind so that we can utilize the wind for the dispersal. And so, yeah, it looks like this far side over here will be a good place to start.
What we're actually seeing in the water right now is a very high level of bacteria in the water, which means we have a situation where a single microorganism is taking over the entire ecological niche. And this is a very bad disturbance to biodiversity, for starters. And at the same time, they're starting to release a lot of metabolites, a lot of toxins into the water, so the water becomes toxic.
That's what they use their secret formula against.
So this is basically a compound that leaves no residue in the water. It will create a sublethal oxidative stress around these toxic bacteria that you can see in the water, and it will cause them to start a biological process that will cause them to undergo a collective suicide.
The powder triggers a chemical reaction, which not only cleans the lakes, but then they made another discovery. Algae can store a vast amount of climate-damaging CO2. Normally, when algae die, however, they release the stored carbon back into the atmosphere. They knew that. But the blue-green researchers discovered that when algae are treated with their product, they turn into limestone, which binds the CO2.
If we calculate how much CO2 can be captured in this setup alone, I would say something in the range of 500 to 1,000 tons. And that is all due to the powerful biological carbon pump that exists within this microalgae. They can multiply in biomass every couple of hours, meaning every 10 cells within a couple of days will turn into 150 million cells. It's that fast. And so the biomass that builds up takes a lot of carbon and absorbs it. So when we're able to take all that population, all this bacterial population, and cause it to shut down and go down to the bottom, we can bury fantastic quantities of carbon.
His vision is to clean algae-infested lakes to store climate-damaging greenhouse gases. Companies that want to improve their CO2 footprint can then buy CO2 certificates from his startup, a potentially revolutionary idea.
Us and 100 companies like us joining in an effort to use the oceans and the lakes of the world to fight climate change, I believe we may be able not only to achieve net zero targets, but potentially go even beyond that to net negative, because the overall potential for carbon removal in water is some 15 gigatons a year only in fresh water and almost 100 gigatons of carbon in the oceans. This is more than we need. This is more than we need. So if we join hands and create the right incentives and put them in place and get this in motion, then we are just, maybe, we'll just be able to miss the point where it's beyond repair.
So far, Ale and his team have removed nearly 3.5 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere and cleaned dozens of lakes with their technology. From the east coast of the Mediterranean to the south coast, Morocco, the North African country is 7th in the climate protection ranking. Does that surprise you? Germany is in 16th place and Switzerland in 22nd. More than 30% of the country's electricity already comes from renewable sources, and that figure is expected to rise to over 50% by 2030. On the one hand, the country has huge potential for renewable energy. On the other hand, it is particularly affected by climate change, rising sea levels, droughts, and desertification. King Mohammed VI prescribed a climate action plan for Morocco back in 2006, one of the first countries in the world to do so. Our next story begins in Rabat, with a man who has done much to put Morocco where it is today in terms of climate action.
My name is Badriken. I'm an entrepreneur and executive president of GI3, Green Innovative Investment, and we're developing green industry in Morocco and in Africa.
Badr Iken studied mechanical engineering and solar systems in Germany. After that, he managed research projects. When he saw that something was changing in his home country, he decided to return and built a high-tech research business.
I was definitely lucky because the bottom line is that after I had been in Germany for 18 years and spent 18 years of my life in Europe, and I returned, it wasn't easy, of course, because I had to settle in again. However, I came, I would say, at the right moment. I really had the opportunity and the chance to implement a lot of what I had learned here in Morocco.
Morocco's king had decided to make the kingdom a climate champion, and researchers like Badr Iken were to support the country in this green revolution. Renewable energies, made in Morocco, that was the goal. And so the engineer founded the Research Institute for Solar and New Energies IRISEN in Ben Goueria, an hour's drive from Marrakesh. In the Green Energy Park, engineers are working on new photovoltaic systems, charging stations for electric cars and green hydrogen. High-tech for the African continent, adapted to the climate needs of the region. For 12 years, Badr Iken headed this largest research centre for solar energy in Africa. Then he became an entrepreneur himself. Today, he profits from the research results for his company, which builds solar plants. Visit with his successor, Samir Rachidi.
The new e-car charging station is being developed here. And this is where the new modules for the desert are being developed. In such a center, we are able to identify the best technologies for Morocco, for Africa. And at the same time, for me, as an entrepreneur, I now have the experts who can also accompany me in a sustainable innovation for my products.
With this spirit of optimism, he is currently building his first own factory. In just a few months, workers will have this hall out of the ground, and by September, the first solar panels should be rolling off the assembly line.
Very good, perfect. We'll start with 40,000 units a year, solar thermal hot water collectors. And in 2 years, we will go towards 100,000 units a year. Or to be precise, exactly 90,000 units a year. That will be the largest solar collector company in Africa.
In Afrika sein.
And that's definitely a great experience. It's really a dream. We're experiencing a revolution right now.
The flagship of this revolution is in the desert, not far from Ouarzazate. Noor, light in Arabic, has been providing electricity for 2 million people since 2016. It should show the world that Morocco is serious about the energy revolution. 4 plants, 3 different technologies. 1 photovoltaic, 2 solar thermal and 1 solar tower power plant. A €1.8 billion investment, financed also with EU money.
My name is Soukaina El Idrissi. I am an engineer at the Noor 2 power plant in Ouarzazate.
Soukaina El Idrissi works in the control room of the solar thermal power plant. She is part of the young team. All the engineers are under 30. Every day, she and her colleague Abderrazak El Amrani check the plant. Hundreds of thousands of curved mirrors reflect the sun's rays.
Here we are in the solar field of the Noor 2 power plant. As you can see here, we have cylindrical parabolic collectors and a tube in the middle. We have a heat transfer fluid flowing through this tube. And through the mirrors, we concentrate the sunlight onto the tube to heat the fluid inside, which then generates steam that drives the turbine. That's the biggest part of the power plant. There are always problems that we have to solve.
The advantage of this technology is that the energy can be stored for hours and generate electricity even after the sun has long set.
As a young woman here in Morocco, I feel really proud. When I started studying renewable energy, there weren't many projects. Noor was in its infancy and still under construction. I hoped that maybe one day I would be a part of it. Never did I think that this dream would come true. I almost can't believe that I am now part of this great project that is unique in the world. A project with which we want to reduce our CO2 emissions, protect the environment, and at the same time, ensure Morocco's energy independence. So yes, I am very proud.
The plant has one drawback. It requires water from the Ouarzazate reservoir, water that is increasingly scarce and urgently needed downstream. Continue along the Droughts River to M. Hamid, the last oasis before the Sahara.
My name's Halim Sbai. I'm a tour guide, environmental and cultural heritage activist.
Halim Sbai was born in M. Hamid. He has spent most of his life here. As a child, he still immersed himself in the cool waters of the Droughts River.
When I was a little boy in the 1980s, the river was full of water. We didn't have a bridge, but we had water. And at times, the 2 banks were cut off. So the people from the village couldn't get into the oasis, and the people from the oasis couldn't get into the village. Since 1984, there has been less and less water. And the little water that comes seeps into the desert or evaporates. When there are thunderstorms, it rains extremely hard, but nothing remains here. The only thing that remains is this clay.
And without water there is no life. Migration and the loss of cultural assets are the result. Morocco alone has lost 2/3 of its oases in the last 100 years. Even the Ksar, as these traditional fortified settlements made of clay are called, where Halim grew up, a ruin.
We're at the edge of the village. Behind us are the last palm trees, and they're getting fewer and fewer. They were a natural barrier for the village. So since there are no more palm trees and no more vegetation, the sand is moving towards the village, which was also a man-made barrier. But since there's more sand and less water, there's less vegetation. And that's why people are leaving their homes. It's like you're given the field to a strong enemy without resistance in a war. The wind and desertification are a strong enemy, and they love it when we give them space. And as soon as the space is vacated, they take it.
About 2 million people live in the Moroccan oases, but as the desert advances, the places are losing more and more residents.
This whole part was inhabited until the 1980s. Then people started to migrate. This house there, the big one, it was inhabited until the 1960s. We're not responsible for the climate crisis. We didn't cause it. But we're feeling the consequences with full force.
Halim's homeland has already lost most of its inhabitants. Some oases are still being cultivated, but even that is becoming increasingly difficult. Nevertheless, Halim wants to maintain traditional irrigation in his oasis. The water is pumped from the well with an old motor. Some farmers now have to go down as far as 100 meters to reach the groundwater. Dates grow in this unique farming system, and grains, fruits and vegetables grow in the shade of palm trees.
People often ask us why we don't switch to drip irrigation. We don't because a special microclimate is formed along these channels. It's ideal for plants and insects that live here. With drip irrigation, that would be lost. We continue to irrigate with the pump, the way they used to do it.
How to preserve this unique ecosystem? Halim already has the solution in mind.
Around the oases, you could build hundreds of water basins. And every time it rains, you would have to capture and store that water so that in times when the water is lacking, you have it available and you don't have to tap into the groundwater. That needs to be protected.
Halim is fighting on two fronts at once. He tries to pass on the Berber culture to the younger generations through music. They sing of life in the desert, of love and the beauty of the oases. And he is forging ahead to build a palm barrier to stop the desert. According to estimates, the number of palm trees in Morocco has declined from 15 million to 6 million in the last century. Since 2008, Halim has planted more than 4,000 trees, and he makes the reforestation a celebration for the community.
Here we're building a wall of palm trees to protect the oasis. We make holes in the sand for planting date palms. It's the best way to combat desertification.
Using the so-called water box increases the tree's chance of survival. A Dutch organisation donates these biodegradable boxes.
Water box a little bit yesterday. As you can see, it's a water reservoir. The water will go in here and the trees will go through here.
It's as if you had a relative in intensive care with little chance of recovery. So you pray night and day for them to stay alive, hoping one day perhaps for some wonder drug that will save them.
But there are no wonder drugs. The IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, warns that unless drastic measures are taken, the climate crisis will escalate. North Africa and the Mediterranean are showing that the time to act is now.